Thursday, December 31st, 2015. Derek Davis here with Rob Vino, sportsbettingtoday.us and Rob Vino Sports. Rob, 3 college games on the Las Vegas board today. Here's the last one, the playoff game. It's the early game, but it's the late one as far as the number in the rotation. Rotation number 261, 262, Oklahoma and Clemson. 4 p.m. Eastern kickoff in this one. Game played from Miami, Florida in the Orange Bowl. Should be low 80s, humid. Nice night for football. Not what most of us expect as far as an evening for football this time of the year, but for Miami, that's the way it goes. Oklahoma, a 3.5 point favorite in this one, Rob. Total of 64. Game opened at Oklahoma as a 4-point favorite. And a total of 65. Oklahoma opened as a 4-point favorite and a total of 65. Let's say that one more time. Game currently sits at 3.5 and 64. Injury-wise, not injuries, but Clemson did have some issues with some kids getting kicked off for drugs. Really the only player of note, the wide receiver, should be missed. 5 touchdowns on the year from him. Other than that, both teams seem to be at full strength here, Rob. Clemson, the number 1 team in the country for the entire run of the playoffs, or the entire duration of the playoff seeding since they were released. Clemson has been number 1 and stayed number 1. But really hasn't played their best football in the past 6 weeks, Rob. They're 1-4 against the spread in their last 5 games. In their last 6 games, Rob, they've given up 41, 13, 27, 13, 32, and 37. Not a lot of consistency on that Clemson defense the past few weeks. The Sooners, on the other hand, are rolling. The loss to Texas seemed to be exactly what that team needed, Rob. Bob Stoops did a fantastic job of getting that team turned around quickly. They rebounded after Texas by just waxing Kansas State, then waxing Texas Tech, Kansas, Iowa State. Baylor really haven't stopped. TCU, a squeaker there, but then waxed Oklahoma State in the de facto Big 12 title game. That really left no question as to who was the best team in that conference. The story of the year in Norman, Rob, of course, Baker Mayfield, the former walk-on from Texas Tech, transfers to Norman right after Oklahoma had beaten Alabama in the Sugar Bowl with an established quarterback, it seemed at the time. Baker Mayfield steps in, wins the job in the spring this year, and has really played as good at football as anyone in the country. But lost in all of that, Rob, are quite a few deficiencies on the University of Oklahoma defense. The Sooners have gotten backup quarterbacks in their last 3 games, Rob, against Oklahoma State, TCU, and Baylor, yet still giving up 23, 29, 34 points. They get an offense here with Clemson, Rob, that's very established, able to move the football. And the Sooners have traditionally struggled with mobile quarterbacks like Watson. So there are some opportunities for Clemson to exploit the Sooners here, but right back at you with OU's offense. They can score on you fast. They have got great talent at wide receiver. Obviously, we talked about quarterback, but their offensive line and their running backs, Rob, are as good as it gets in college football. So a good matchup, one that I do think favors a team like Oklahoma who can run the football and run it for big yards, big chunks of yards. Rob, do you think Clemson has what it takes to be able to slow down the OU running game? I'm not confident that anyone's going to slow down the OU passing game, but do you think that Clemson can do what it takes to slow down that OU running game?
Yeah, the semifinal number 1 game today, Derek, has brought us more chatter in the form of personnel losses than anything in the last 24 hours. Obviously, Dabo Swinney had to send players home from Clemson. Most importantly, second leading wide receiver, Deion Kane, a guy who's come up with 5 touchdown passes, in the last few games have become a favorite target of Deshaun Watson, sort of takes away from the depth of that receiving core for Clemson. It'll be interesting to see now if Oklahoma can gain an advantage from that. But that's a big loss for Clemson. And on the other side, earlier this morning, we find that Oklahoma defensive tackle sophomore Charles Walker won't be playing in this game. Suffered a concussion in practice on Monday. An integral part of that defensive line. Maybe some would argue that he is the most important part of that defensive line this season, responsible for 6 sacks, I think 10 tackles for loss. Definitely somebody who plugs the middle against the run, a difference maker, and it's a huge blow for Oklahoma across that defensive line. So we'll see if the Clemson rushing game improves today without Walker in there. That could be a significant factor in today's contest. But from an overall standpoint here, I mean, you're talking about two teams, very explosive, push the pace, up tempo offenses. Both teams, come in here with kind of that tag of, I don't want to call it failure, but not coming through in big situations. Bob Stoops, it's been a long time since Oklahoma's won a big game, one of this magnitude. It's been a long time since they played in one of this magnitude, come to think of it. So it's an important game for head coach Bob Stoops. It's an important game for head coach Dabo Swinney, both of their programs. Oklahoma, routed by Clemson 40-6 last year, comes in as if you need any more motivation. You're playing in a national semifinal, but if you need more motivation, 40-6 sits right there for you if you're an Oklahoma player. The televised piece that's been going on for about the last 24 hours of Clemson creating a headstone, a gravestone for Oklahoma that cites the 40-6 final score on it and planting it, placing it on their campus. Oklahoma players will draw motivation from that as well. So you get a fired up Oklahoma team, definitely a fired up Clemson team. Any team coached by Dabo Swinney is going to come out of the locker room fired up. So this should be a real good game here. Basically boils down to, I think, quarterback play. Do you like Baker Mayfield or do you like Deshaun Watson? Kind of hard to split the two. They both had tremendous seasons. I think that Deshaun Watson displays a certain calm about him, been very good all year long. He's probably the better runner. Baker Mayfield the better scrambler, but Deshaun Watson the better runner, and both pretty accurate throwers. I mean, they've had great seasons. Oklahoma's got a little bit more in the wide receiving core, especially with Kane now out. Oklahoma's got the two-headed monster at running back. When you speak of Mixon and P. Ryan, they have become a very important part of this Oklahoma offense. Don't know where they would be without these two guys the second half of the year. Once they got Samaje P. Ryan going, the combination of he and Joe Mixon kind of that, let's call him, he's too big to be called a scat back, but his ability to run the football and be dominant in the passing game out of the backfield as well, important to Oklahoma. Very explosive is Joe Mixon. Sterling Shepard at wide receiver. They've got pieces all over the place. For Clemson, the ground game is dependent upon the quarterback, Deshaun Watson has already said, and then Wayne Gallman, who's come from nowhere to be an absolute stud running back this year. Clemson's offensive line, Oklahoma's offensive line, both playing real good football right now. I think the secondaries are both good. It's hard to go through these games and find real differences between the two, but I think if you had to look for individual factors that could decide this game, to me, Oklahoma's got more explosive weaponry on their side of the football, on their offensive side of the football, so I'd give them an edge there. But I also wonder if running through that Big 12 schedule, Oklahoma's faced a defense that's as good as Clemson's. I mean, the Big 12 littered with teams that play up tempo, that score a lot of points, but let's face it, when you're playing a depleted TCU defense, when you're playing The Baylor defense, which has been hurt at the time that Oklahoma played them in November, they were banged up a little bit. When you're playing Oklahoma State's defense, which hadn't been tested until November, and we saw how they faltered terribly down the stretch. Texas Tech, Kansas State, just not any good defenses here. Texas, a very young defense. I don't know if Oklahoma is totally ready for this. My guess would be they are, but I think there's that grain of doubt that says, hey, maybe they're running into a defense that could be a little too tough for them to put up the type of numbers that they've been used to putting up the last few weeks. Also want to note very quickly that Oklahoma has played a lot of backup quarterbacks down the stretch, and they hung on for dear life against TCU. So, and maybe that factors in here. But still, I think you could make those same arguments for Clemson because Clemson had a close call against South Carolina late in the year. Both teams have had plenty of time to get ready for this game. It's a great game. Power ratings say Oklahoma should only be a 2-point favorite here, yet they're listed at 4.5. Maybe that's a little bit of an edge there toward the Clemson side. Total in this game has been bet down. 64.5 or 65 as an opener, and we're looking now at about 62.5. So it's come down. Maybe some of that's due to the Kane suspension, but the Walker loss on the Oklahoma side might make up for that. I'd be more inclined to play it over, and I think power ratings suggest you should play Clemson here, but it's a very difficult game to handicap. Should be fun to watch, but difficult from a handicapping standpoint. I think if you believe in Oklahoma gaining their revenge against Clemson, then you go ahead and lay the 4. If you think Clemson is stout enough to not be overwhelmed early in this game, then I think you want Clemson, because if Clemson doesn't get behind by a couple of touchdowns quick, then they can probably get their footing and hang in this one. We'll see. Should be an excellent game. And then, of course, they'll find out who they play later on in the Alabama-Michigan State game. But as for this one, I think it's kind of a toss-up to me. I think I would lean slightly toward Oklahoma.